Welcome to this episode of Shoulder to Shoulder, where we strive to grow in love of the Lord and each other. I'm Pam Marvin.
And I'm Megan Silas.
And we are continuing our series on 1 Corinthians 13. And we've gotten into this, like the negative aspect of it too, right? Which is a little harder for me. I'm not going to lie. I like talking about the positive. I try to be. Yeah. But you know, most of my life, especially as a child growing up, I was very a negative Nelly.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Why did I not know that about you?
Well, because I've worked so hard in my life to not be that way.
Huh. Okay.
I mean,
well, when did the change happen?
When did it start changing? After I met my husband in college, because he just wasn't. He was super positive, and one of the things that really drew me to him at that time.
Huh.
Very positive world. His outlook was just always rosy. Even today, there's like, oh, everything's great. It's fine.
I don't think I'm either. I don't think I'm. I think I'm one of those people who's just like middle of the road on that. You know, I'm definitely not a pessimist, but I'm also not ordered towards always, being always looking on the bright side or whatever.
No, I mean, I really think that my faith as a young woman started to retrain my brain to be more positive. I mean, that's what our faith does. It helps us to all things grace, right? Count it all joy. Mm-hmm. All things work for good, you know?
Yeah,
I believe.
I think for me, there's like a lot of like holding two things at once. I do that all the time. If I were to say, and I know that I've talked about this before on other episodes, like a real defining feature of how I approach everything is the both and. I can be both joyful and look at hard realities at the same time. Like I don't have to, be one or the other. It's like, I think a lot of people function in this place where they feel like if I acknowledge this hard thing, then that means I'm not being optimistic or I'm not being hopeful or I'm not being joyful. And I'm kind of like, no, you can be both. You can do both. So anyway, but that's kind of
interesting.
But I did also, before we get into the topic, let's talk about something that's more positive before we get into jumping into the negative.
What is that?
You are going to be going on a trip.
I am
soon. So
next week.
Tell me a little bit. Tell me, but others a little bit about it.
Well, if you're in the Bryan College Station area or ever lived here, you're probably aware of the Little Wrangler program that is patterned after the Aggie Wranglers here at Texas A&M, of which my daughter's a part of, and my son is a big part of. He is the director of the North Houston Little Wranglers, and we are all going.
Hold up, because people listening who are not familiar with that might think that this is some cowboy skills thing. So it's a dance troupe.
It's dance.
Yeah. But really super fun, like Texas
country
dance.
Western swing. Look it up. It's amazing and
so
fun.
Cute.
So fun. Well, all of the, they've now franchised to North Houston. There's 2 outlets or studios up in the Dallas area, soon to be one over in the Hill Country as well. Anyway, this is the year-end trip. We always do a year-end trip. And so me and my 2 youngest daughters are going to be taking off with my son and his new wife. I love saying that. I love you, Maddie. We'll be taking off at the end of this week. Looking forward to being with them. But, I'm struggling with some issues about just like letting myself have fun, to be honest.
Where are you going again?
Honduras, Cozumel, Mexico, around those areas.
So those Caribbean places.
Yeah, but I'm really looking forward to spending time with the kids.
Oh, those aren't really Caribbean places. I'm not good at geography. I'm going to be honest about that. But beachy kind of places.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to that. I may even just stay on the boat. And guess what book I've picked up to read?
What?
It's Father Elijah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that book.
Have you? Actually, it's not the Father Elijah itself, but he started a new series called Sojourners.
Oh,
and it's
Strangers and Sojourners.
Yes,
it's
and
another book in the same series, but it's like a prequel.
Okay, where it's apocalyptic times and the moral conflicts that we face during that time. So I'm really looking forward to.
Hopefully, have you read Father Elijah?
No.
Okay, interesting. Because Father Elijah I liked better than Strangers and Sojourners, but
Oh man.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'll have to get a half price today. See if they got.
Was that rude? Was that rude of me to bring that up?
Is that unkind? You just burst my bubble. No, it's all good.
The reason I said was that rude because we're at a point in our exploration of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 where we're going to talk about love things that are not love things, actually. And so today we're focusing on pompous and inflated and rude. We have put those all together as something that we want to talk about as sort of related to each other and the way that one could interact in relationships. And certainly not ideal ways.
Right. And as most people know, that sometimes the best way to explain what something is to talk about what it is not. And so as we talk about this discourse on what love is, we are also talking about it was not. So it's
because
not
that's what Paul did when he wrote this, right?
Inflated.
Yeah. So at the beginning, when we were kind of talking about, we try, sometimes we try to figure out, well, what's something that we could use as an example of something going on in the news or whatever that would kind of bring in this topic. And so Pam was asking me, well, do you have anything you can think of that relates to these qualities? And I have to admit, the immediate thing that came to me was how polarizing former President Trump is. Right. And, he's so much in the news still as now running for president again and having all these issues with indictments and all this. And, I think one of the things that is so incredibly polarizing about him is that in his behavior, he is often pompous.
I think pompous
and rude.
Mm-hmm. Can I have a qualifier here?
Okay,
too,
qualifier.
I gotta say, and I don't know. I know this may be shocking to you, but you need to know this about me, Megan. It's a disclosure right now.
How do you know I don't already know it?
You might, but I don't think you do.
Okay.
I have a funny bone when it comes to dark humor.
Okay. All right.
I really do.
Can you give me an example of something you would consider dark humor?
Oh, the movie Game Night was one of it. The dark humor on that part was like they thought they were in a game, but it really was people killing each other, and they thought it was all just for show, and it was hilarious. That kind of dark humor. Like people were really dying.
Okay, you're going to have to describe.
Go watch the movie. Go watch the movie.
There must be some other element that's funny about that, but...
Right? You have to see it.
Okay.
It's
so
hilarious.
How does that relate to this issue?
The way it relates is when I see him being pompous, rude, and arrogant, I think it's hilarious.
Okay.
I think it's really funny.
But here's a question.
Because it really it triggers so many people, and people don't take this so seriously.
Mm-hmm. So then I think that comes from a place of, if you thought he was doing it for that purpose, that he isn't actually pompous and rude himself as a person, but that's just an act in order to get at people. I could see how that could work out, right? Like how you could think that way. He's just pushing his buttons.
He does.
He does. I mean, he definitely pushes the buttons, right? And so the question is, okay, is he intentionally pushing the buttons, or is this just a, consequence of him being who he is? But I think the really important point about it is that it is a huge turnoff to a lot of people, to the point that even if they could agree that the manner in which he governed, as far as policies and how things went in the country, was good, they would never vote for him. Like the never Trumpers, those people, it's like, I don't care what he does. Like, he could save 10 dolphins from being murdered, and yet I don't care. I'm never voting for him. It's like, and I think part of that is this aversion that a lot of people tend to have towards what they consider self-inflating behavior and coarseness.
Yeah, of course.
What they would consider rude.
Mm-hmm.
So I think pompous and inflated, or we're a little more clear, I think, on what that means. People
uncivilized.
Yeah, people who are trying to build them, present themselves as being awesome. Like, I'm great. I can't say it like he says it. I'm not a very good. Trump. Everything's great that he does. It's just great. But so we understand that kind of thing. But rude, in a way, is harder to grasp at this point because we have had such a disintegration of social graces that it's almost like where is the line now as to what's rude or coarse or uncivilized or whatever. Like, how often do you hear, that's just me being me. I'm just being me. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well.
Yeah, but Megan, at the same time, people are overly sensitive and offended so easily.
That's true too.
So easily. It's like, I definitely grew up in a home where my mother was an English teacher, so words really matter. And we would try and talk correctly and so forth and whatever. But as time has gone on and people are starting to say, well, that offends me that you can't say that, whatever it is. Like when I was a kid in the 80s, that wasn't offensive language. And now that it is, and it's changed, it's like there's just been this slow boil of what's rude and crass and arrogant and off the chart. But at the same time, foul language, like I said in one of the previous episodes, has just become commonplace. What's going on? That's pretty pompous too.
It's a good point you make because you can see it going both ways. Like at some point, there's not as much social graces, there's not as much gentility that you see in discourse.
It's a lot.
But then on the other way, there is much more of sometimes a sensitivity and some of these behaviors, I have to be honest, like almost tinge to me as a little bit of an attack on more stereotypical masculinity.
Oh, interesting, because I think it's human dignity, just an attack in general on human dignity. When you take God out of the culture and then human dignity starts to really dwindle the way they see other people. We're made in the image and likeness of God, and that in itself needs to be respected regardless of socioeconomic status, appearance, skin color, anything like that.
No, I agree. But what I'm saying, it's kind of an attack on masculinity. This sort of sensitive snowflake flower, that kind of thing where everything's offensive. There used to be this idea that, there's locker room talk. Guys behave in a way together sometimes that's less genteel and cultured than they would maybe if ladies were around. Right. And so there was sort of an outlet for that. But now to say that is like considered sexist, I guess, because it's almost like they want it both ways. It's like, I'm going to get easily offended by that stuff. But if you say that I can't say that, you couldn't say that around women, that means you're sexist because you don't think women can take it. Like, where do you even go?
Right.
It's just like people are just second guessing.
What do they call that? A circular argument?
Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. But so I think as it relates to us bringing up Trump, he is kind of this polarizing figure that almost is bringing up in society a lot of the confusions that exist. And people are just deciding based on how they respond to him is almost like what part of the culture they want to embrace. So either it's the more rough and tumble sort of what would be considered historically more masculine way of being, or this more genteel, sensitive, whatever kind of being. But as it relates to love,
right?
We're not then talking about generalizations of people as they function within a culture. We're talking about individuals and how they behave within their relationships. And it may be one thing for my husband, when he's off, on a golfing trip with his buddies to be kind of braggadocio and maybe say some coarse things, which I'm not sure he would actually do. But if he did, that's a different thing than if he's like trying to be all a braggart in our relationship and belittling me by his own self-aggrandizement or being rude to me, he can say to one of his buddies, hey, you're acting like a whatever. But if he's going to say that to me, it was interesting. Okay. Here's a personal story.
Okay.
I went to go see a movie with Kate, my daughter, last night. And there was a scene where a guy called a woman an a-hole. And I turned to Kate and I was like, that's not a term that people usually use for women. Like, I was trying to think, had I ever heard anybody call a woman that in the past, that in my own experience, like, I don't think I could think of any of it. And so it was interesting to me how it seemed so strange that it just like dinged on me. And so this idea that, what someone might do in one area, it wouldn't necessarily be rude. It might just be funny. Where in another relationship, it could be very rude and offensive, depending on, even if it was done in jest. Like this idea of, you don't talk to a lady that way, or, you wouldn't say that to a child,
right.
So this idea of like understanding appropriateness in relationship and what is going to impact that relationship in a way that builds it or tears it down. And I think those two terms, build and tear down, are really important with this, because when you're being pompous or arrogant, your purpose is to build yourself up. But in focusing on building yourself up, you're tearing down the integrity of the relationship, because you're trying to present yourself as being greater than the other individual.
Right, which the reality is, as you like to say, the reality is.
Mm-hmm.
You say that a lot.
I did not know that.
You do. The reality is.
I'm glad you find it cute and not annoying.
It's cute.
Because now I'm going to find it annoying every time I hear myself saying it. So thanks for that.
Oh, sorry.
Just kidding.
But when people continue to be that way, it's also a trigger for them to be the more introspective. Is why are they that way? Are they covering up for something? If it's the opposite of what love really is, being pompous and arrogant, I don't know. When people are that way, to me, I just see really broken people that feel like they need to build themselves up, and it invokes in me a certain amount of compassion, the overbearing, pompous, arrogant, I'm in charge kind of stuff.
And I totally can understand that response, is because, I agree that a lot of times people
I'm better than you.
Yeah. A lot of times people who are working so hard to show how awesome they are is because they're actually trying to convince themselves more than they're trying to convince any person that they're with. And that it can often stem from a very deep seated place of low self-esteem and fear and shame and all these sort of things. But I'm interested for you, as you recognize that reality and are moved to compassion, do you want to be with those people?
Not always. No, definitely not. I mean, I am very, okay, let's give it like a real world kind of example, that everybody has that person that talks excessively, that friend, acquaintance, perfectly likable person, but they talk incessantly and need to be a center of the attention. Again, a product of the woundedness. It's like, how do you look on them with compassion and love? I mean, you do, and just listen perhaps, but I don't know. How do you love them well? By listening? Do we say, do you realize you're really dominating the conversation? Maybe you should let me in. But no, that wouldn't be generous on my part. It wouldn't be kind. It wouldn't be a loving thing to say. Maybe
really? Maybe it would. I don't know.
I don't know.
Sometimes, as far as, interacting in that situation, perhaps instead of just letting them go off with their, laundry list of things they're awesome at, you could ask questions that try to get at a deeper place of, you're really, somebody say, I'm amazing at, I don't know, financial investments.
Oh,
I'm like a super, I just call it all the time. You'd be like, you could probe instead of, you just say, oh, you're interested in finance. How did you get interested in that? How does that, your involvement in that, how does that impact, what do you enjoy about it? are there things that frustrate you about it, even though that you're good at it?
Yeah.
Like, are there times when you feel like, in certain areas, maybe you could try to engage. Sometimes
you're being very
willing
generous. Usually I'm having an interior dialogue that sounds something like this. Just be patient, Liam. Just be patient. Just listen. Be self-giving and all these things, which I don't know if that's really the right attitude as well. Or, I have something to say, but I'm just going to be quiet and let them talk, because maybe that's what they need, is just a person to listen.
Yeah. Well, I said what you could do, which would be really nice and like help to get to know the person better. In reality, what I actually would be doing in that situation is, how can I get out of here as fast as possible? Because I do not want to listen to this. Because honestly, I find it very hard to be in that situation where somebody's just tooting their own horn like crazy. And I just I don't want it. I do not want to be in the presence of this, because it makes me feel very uncomfortable. I feel like that
too. But at the times when there's really not an option, like there's certain circumstances that came up that required it, you make the best of it, right?
Yeah. But I don't think that my response is uncommon.
No.
And so the point there being, when we behave that way, being pompous, being, arrogant, rude, it will push people away. And if your goal in doing those things is to try to convince people you're awesome so that they'll want to be in relationship with you, you've actually done the exact opposite of what you're hoping to do. You have been counterproductive to your own ends. And that's unfortunate, But, I think the Bible verse that seems most relevant to this is when Jesus says, "For I am meek and humble of heart." A meek, humble of heart person is not looking to toot their own horn and be rude and steamroller over people and make themselves the center of attention. And if Jesus is saying, this is who I am, and we want to be in the image and likeness of Christ, clearly those things aren't compatible. But an interesting thing about that is, do you remember what he's talking about right before he says, "For I am meek and humble of heart"?
Follow me.
"Come to me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For I am meek and humble of heart, and my burdens are light." So this idea that if you, in your humility and your meekness, you can be a resting place for a person. Someone who's a resting place for another person is someone that people want to draw near to. Not someone that repels other people.
Right.
And so I think this is a good time for a temperature check.
Oh, no, you do. Okay. You brought it up. What's going on with you?
Well, I am thinking about how there are times when I will be, what's the word I want to use? Self-promotional, even when I don't want to be. Like, it's like I don't want to, I don't want to say this thing that's sort of self-complimentary or like casts a positive light on me of a story or whatever. And yet I do it anyway. Sometimes this is one of those things where, because I have such a distaste for it, when I find myself doing it, it leads to feelings of shame.
Interesting. It's like the bug to the flame. Oh, I just can't help myself. I know I shouldn't, but I'm doing it anyway.
Right. Yeah. And so how important it is. I'm not always good about, in those particular situations, when the shame comes up, it prevents me sometimes from doing the self-analysis of why I felt the need to do that in that circumstance. And so the shame of having done it prevents the thing that could prevent it in the future.
Interesting.
And so it makes me really think about, then the reason I bring that up is because as that thought came to me, I recognized that part of my aversion to listening to people be pompous is that I think that behavior is shameful. And I don't necessarily recognize that maybe they feel the same way and they are living constantly in a place of shame and disgust in their own behavior and how tragic that is. Because I know what it feels like even in the few times that I do it.
Yes. Well, this is how I receive it. If I'm sitting listening to that person, it's not fun. It's not fun, but it's sending a very strong message that I don't matter. I'm not important. And what I have to say is not of any worth.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's how I receive it.
So that feels like that kind of tweaks a rejection wound for you.
Oh, yes, for sure.
That's
I'm not
really
important.
Interesting.
I don't matter.
Because I never respond to it that way.
Yeah.
I love how that is so
different personalities
and different wounds and different perspectives so often can impact how you experience something.
Yeah, for sure. When people don't let you get a word in edgewise, you don't listen. It's hurtful. I say that.
But the thing is, it's not for me because I don't go there. I don't think they're behaving in that way because of how they think or feel about me. I'm thinking about it more about who they are internally than how they feel towards me. Whereas you're experiencing it more as what their behaviors imply about how they feel about you.
Sort of, but it's more that they are so self-involved that there's no one else in the room that matters. So then I don't matter. Right.
Yeah. I think I just stop at they're so self-involved and that's bad.
Yeah.
And I don't get to the next part.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's just interesting.
It is.
So that would mean that I tend to default towards staying more in a place of judgment, and you would default into a place of feeling more judged, but judged as unworthy.
That's true.
Very interesting.
Okay. That's the temperature.
That was
part
a good
2.
temperature check. All right. So I think
relationships.
As we've talked about, I think we kind of covered how it can be very damaging in relationships. And I think honestly, what you brought up in the temperature check even elaborates that point even more fully, that you may think that you're just saying good things about yourself, but the other person might be experiencing it as a rejection of them. And I think a lot of people probably who maybe function in this way have never even thought about that possibility because they're thinking about themselves. So they wouldn't have thought about the other person. But the impact it can have on a relationship is pretty significant. And I know that, I have known people who were in marital relationships with people who just constantly, are tooting their own horn. And it seems like the conversation always has to be about, that person and they feel very unseen, like you said, unimportant and how hurtful that is to the heart. And then unfortunately,
wait.
Yeah. What?
Do you think God feels that way about us if we are always just talking and never listening to him in prayer?
Ooh, good point. Yeah, definitely.
That relationship with him should be more of a give and take. Yeah. I will admit, I have a hard time listening. I'll sit there sometimes, but I am super distracted person. So when I'm sitting in prayer and trying to just listen to the voice of God, I'll be like, does the dog need to go out? What am I going to eat for lunch today?
Because my stuff is clearly important. So that's what I'm thinking about. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think I also told you this when we were kind of doing a pre-show sort of prep. And I said, as far as rudeness to God, I recognize that sometimes I am rude to God. And the way that I most recognized that was me, prayer, and the phone. So I have, I've set aside some time to pray. I've decided I'm going into a place of prayer. I'm giving this time over to the Lord, but I haven't put my phone away from me, and it goes off, and I will just be like, answer it. Just, look at the text or whatever it is. how rude is that? You're in mid conversation with somebody and you just be like totally ignore them and go to the phone.
So rude.
And I do that to God sometimes.
Absolutely, we do.
He understands. He's got all day.
Yeah.
He's got all eternity.
Right.
Right. But that the reality is that that's rude, and it's not relationship building. And unfortunately, part of the problem is that we actually will do that in a lot of relationships these days. That phone, I think, can really be a source of a lot of rude behavior.
Oh, yeah. Let's start there. When you think about practical tips to not be rude, pompous, or inflated, having, self-grandizement of yourself. I mean, without being too, I think simplicity is a better way than like putting yourself down, but the simplistic nature of just loving well.
No, and I think that's a good point. You don't want to, these two things are not like, in order to not be pompous or, self-inflated doesn't mean that you have to be self-deprecating.
Right.
Like those two, no, it's always the middle ground.
That's right.
But the reality is you should be rooted in truth, because humility is not thinking badly of yourself. It's knowing the truth about yourself and living in that truth. That's true humility. So if you're actually awesome at something, like say you're a concert pianist, to say, oh, I'm not very good at the piano, actually. That's not true.
Yeah.
And say, no, I've been incredibly blessed to be skilled at the piano. I'm grateful to God for that gift. But for me to say I'm awesome at math would be ridiculous, because I'm not.
Yeah.
And, they're just not. So there's no reason to build up something that's not true. So it always goes back to that being rooted in truth, but also just like, you don't have to say everything that comes to your head.
Isn't that the truth?
Some discipline in speech, because that fits both being pompous and rude. You don't have to say everything comes in your head. Like if you have a thought about yourself that, oh yeah, I'm super awesome in this area. Like, okay, fine. You thought that. It doesn't mean you have to tell everybody that. You don't have to voice that. Or maybe you had a rude thought, or the word that came to your mind first was not a very genteel, gracious word. All right. Okay. You don't have to say that. You can take a little moment, pick a better word, be mindful of your circumstances, be appropriate and respectful.
True. I'm hearing prudence here. We just be more prudent.
Yeah, I think prudence would be a really good virtue to counterbalance these sort of things.
Right. Yeah. Along with humility, obviously, to be humble. But I mean, I know simplicity is not directly related to a virtue, but it kind of is. And to me, because I think God kind of boils it down to us, makes it easier on us. It's simple. It's not difficult. And the simplicity of use of your words, or just with humility that's needed to love well, like that, Don't complicate things is another way of saying be simple. Don't be complicated. Don't make everything so hard. God doesn't want us to make things so hard.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Well, yeah, I'm thinking of, we had talked about maybe bringing a saint or something, and that maybe personified this. And one of the saints that comes to mind as obviously not being pompous is Saint Bernadette of Subaru, because not of Subaru, her last name was Subaru. But she's a visionary of the Lord's, and there's this story about her that when she went to the convent after the apparitions were over, she was so not self-promotional. She didn't really want anybody to be making over her, and people are regularly trying to make over her. And, they were asking her, oh, how do you feel now that the apparitions are over, and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I am like a broom. I was used and now have been placed back in the closet. And that was fine with her. And, so you can imagine somebody who had had such profound mystical experiences could be like, look at me. Look how awesome I am. The Blessed Mother appeared to me, talked to me, miracles. No, I am simply a little tool in the hand of the Lord.
Yeah. We should pray that we be that every day.
Yeah, because in the end, what do we have to be arrogant about? You know, we are simple little creatures of an almighty God who deigns to be interested in us. You know, and I also think of the Magnificat, you know, my soul doth magnify the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, because he has looked with favor upon his lowly servant. The Almighty has done great things for me, and blessed be his name. You know, Mary, who of any human being in the world had more right to be arrogant about her position. She is the pinnacle of human creation, sinless. And yet she says, his lowly servant. She says, do whatever he tells you to do.
That's right. It's so good.
So may we be like Mother Mary and her divine son, Jesus, meek and humble of heart.
Amen. And kind, not rude, not pompous.
Yeah.
And all the things.
And all the things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining this episode of Shoulder to Shoulder. We hope it has blessed you. We know it's a blessing to us just to be able to talk about the Lord and share our thoughts and ideas with you. Hopefully that you will receive them as the Holy Spirit gives them to us.
Amen. And we hope you'll keep the conversation going by sharing it. And, you know, you never know. It might inspire some great conversations for you to have with whoever you share it with. So we hope that, and we hope that you'll grow in relationships and in knowledge and love of the Lord. And we hope that you will tune in next time. Until then, we hope you'll remain united with us in prayer. God bless.